The silence of Ilara's world was not a void, but a vessel. It held the ghost echoes of her husband's laughter, the memory of birdsong from a childhood she could no longer hear, and the sharp, metallic tang of the village's judgment. Each day, the townsfolk's stares were like stones thrown into her quiet pool, their pity a heavier burden than their scorn. Since the fever had taken her husband and her hearing in the same cruel week, she had become a living relic, a problem to be managed by her brother-in-law, Silas. He was a man whose heart was a shriveled, greedy knot, and he saw Ilara not as grieving kin, but as a squatter on land he now considered his own. He devised a solution that was both a spectacle and a banishment, a cruel joke painted on the canvas of a wedding ceremony. The groom, he announced with a smirk that never reached his eyes, would be the stranger from the northern quarries, a man they called Liam. The whispers that followed Silas's proclamation were like the rustling of dry, dead leaves. Liam was a spectre, a man whittled down by some private sorrow until he was little more than bone and sinew, a whisper of a man whose only notable features were his haunted, grey eyes and the unnerving stillness of his hands. Too thin to survive a winter, one woman hissed. A scarecrow to wed a stone, another laughed. Ilara stood before the village priest, her gaze fixed not on the man she was being forced to marry, but on the tiny, trembling child hiding behind his legs. A girl, no older than 5, with eyes as wide and frightened as a fawn's. This was not just a man, it was a shattered remnant of a family. The union was a cruelty not just to her, but to them. As the priest mumbled the final words, Ilara looked at Liam, truly looked at him, and saw past the gaunt frame. She saw the tremor in his jaw, the profound shame in his eyes, and a strength in his posture that defied his fragility. It was the strength of a lone tree on a windswept cliff, all but stripped bare, yet still standing. The home they were given was the final flourish of Silas's malice. It was a derelict stone cottage at the furthest edge of the village, where the cultivated fields gave way to untamed scrubland. The roof sagged as if sighing under a great weight, and the wind moaned through a dozen gaps in the stonework. A single, gnarled tree stood sentinel, its branches clawing at the grey sky. For Silas, this was a tomb where he could bury his obligation. For Liam, it was a physical manifestation of his own brokenness. He stood in the doorway, his shoulders slumped, the little girl, Wren, clinging to his coat like a burr. He looked at the ruin around them, and a wave of despair so palpable washed over his face that Ilara felt it in the pit of her stomach. She could not hear his defeated sigh, but she could see it in the way his entire body seemed to shrink. But Ilara's spirit, tempered in the forge of loss and silence, refused to crumble. Where Liam saw an end, she saw a beginning. She walked past him into the single, dusty room. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and neglect. Her first act was not one of tears, but of intention. She unfastened the shawl from her shoulders, tied back her hair, and found a loose floorboard. With her bare hands, she began to sweep. Each movement was deliberate, a quiet declaration of war against the decay. She worked without pause, her silence a stark contrast to the cottage's groaning protests. She did not look at Liam or the child. She simply created a small circle of order in the chaos, a patch of clean floor in a sea of filth. Liam watched her, his expression unreadable. He had expected tears, recriminations, perhaps a shared wallowing in their misfortune. He did not expect this quiet, fierce industry. He saw her scoop years of debris into a pile, her jaw set with a determination that shamed his own resignation. As dusk painted the sky in shades of bruised purple, Ilara had cleared a space, wiped down a small table, and unpacked the meager bundle of her belongings, a tin pot, 2 spoons, a worn blanket. It wasn't much, but it was a start. It was a home. In the days that followed, a silent rhythm was established between the 3 broken souls. Ilara would rise before the sun, her movements soft and practiced. She would coax a small fire to life in the crumbling hearth, the flickering light a small beacon against the gloom. She would prepare a thin porridge, leaving a bowl for Liam on the rough-hewn table. He would be gone before she woke, his lanky frame disappearing into the pre-dawn mist, heading towards the abandoned quarry a mile away. He returned each evening covered in a fine white dust, his hands raw, placing a few meager potatoes or a handful of wild greens on the table in silent payment for his meal. He never spoke. Wren remained a ghost, a peripheral shadow who watched Elara with wary, intelligent eyes. She would not come near, flinching if Elara's gaze lingered too long. She spent her days huddled in a corner, clutching a small, featureless rag doll. Elara understood that the child's fear was a fortress built of trauma, and it could not be stormed. So, she began a gentle siege of kindness. One afternoon, while Liam was away, Elara sat by the fire and, with a small knife her husband had left her, began to carve a piece of scrap wood. Slowly, patiently, a bird took shape under her nimble fingers, a small, smooth sparrow with its head cocked as if listening. She sanded it with a piece of rough stone until it was silken to the touch. That evening, she placed it not in Wren's hands, but on the windowsill nearest the child's corner, and walked away. The next morning, it was gone. Later that day, she saw Wren clutching it, her tiny thumb stroking its wooden wings. It was the first crack in the ice. Liam noticed, too. That evening, when he returned, he did not just leave food. Next to the potatoes lay a single, perfectly smooth, heart-shaped stone he had found at the quarry. It was a wordless message, an offering. A piece of beauty in exchange for her own. Elara picked it up, its coolness a comfort in her palm. It was the first gift she had received in a very long time. A fragile hope, delicate as a spider's thread in the morning dew, began to weave itself around the cottage. The heart-shaped stone was the first of many. Each evening, Liam would leave another offering by the door, a piece of quartz that caught the light, a flat slate perfect for a shelf, a fossil-imprinted rock. They were his words, his way of acknowledging the world Elara was building inside the crumbling walls. He, in turn, began his own project of creation. Using the stones he brought back from the quarry, he started to repair their broken home. He did not patch the gaps, he rebuilt them. His work was meticulous, a form of meditation. Each stone was chosen with care, fitted with an artist's precision. The rhythmic tap-tap-tap of his hammer and chisel became the heartbeat of their new life. Slowly, a sturdy, beautiful wall began to rise around their small patch of land, a physical boundary against the world's scorn. Inside that boundary, Elara cultivated her own miracle. In a patch of earth cleared of stones and weeds, she planted the seed she had carefully saved. A small garden began to sprout, its tender green shoots a vibrant promise against the grey stone. Wren, emboldened by the silent kindness that enveloped her, began to venture out of her corner. She would sit on the doorstep, the wooden bird in her hand, watching her father build the wall and Elara tend the garden. One afternoon, she placed a wildflower she had picked inside the wall into one of Elara's empty bowls. It was her first offering. The silence at their shared meals was no longer empty, it was comfortable, filled with the language of exchanged glances and small, shared smiles. The community began to take notice. Passers-by would slow their carts, staring in disbelief at the transformation. The ruin was becoming a sanctuary. The whispers began to change their tune, from mockery to a grudging, bewildered admiration for that scarecrows and that stone. The season turned, and the hope that had taken root in the cottage was growing strong. The stone wall was complete, a handsome and formidable barrier. The garden was thriving, promising a small but sufficient harvest. Wren now followed Elara like a small shadow, sometimes even offering a fleeting, shy smile. The cottage, once a symbol of shame, had become a testament to resilience. But peace, for the wounded, is often a temporary reprieve. Silas arrived on a blistering summer afternoon, his horse kicking up dust that settled on Elara's green bin leaves. He dismounted, his expensive boots a stark contrast to the simple earth of their yard. His eyes, small and avaricious, swept over the changes. He saw not a home, but an asset. He saw the sweat of Liam's brow, the care of Elara's hands, and calculated its value. Well, well, he sneered, his voice a rasp that grated on the quiet air. You've been busy. Polishing my property for me. He ignored Elara completely, his gaze fixed on Liam, who had stopped his work, his hammer held loosely in his hand. I'm impressed, Scarecrow. You've turned this hovel into something almost respectable. Silas walked over to the new wall, running a hand over the expertly fitted stones. Good work. Solid. Increases the value. He turned back, his smile a predator's grin. And for that, I'll be needing rent. A significant rent. This land is too valuable now to be occupied by you. The threat hung in the air, thick and suffocating. He named a sum that was impossibly high, a figure designed to break them, to drive them out so he could claim the fruits of their labor. He looked from Liam's gaunt face to Ilara's still form, his expression dripping with smug satisfaction. He had given them a ruin to perish in, and they had dared to build a life instead. For that, they had to be punished. He would tear it all down again, simply because he could. Liam did not answer with words. He did not possess the kind of weapon Silas used, words dipped in venom, sharpened by arrogance. His response was a profound and unmoving silence. He simply stood, his thin frame seeming to gain density, to root itself into the very earth he had cultivated. He was no longer the haunted scarecrow from the wedding day, he was the guardian of this small sanctuary. The hammer in his hand was not a weapon, but an extension of his will to create, to protect. His grey eyes met Silas's, and for the first time, they held no fear, no shame, only a granite-like resolve. He was a wall, just like the one he had built. Seeing his defiance, Ilara moved from the doorway to stand beside him. She did not touch him, but her presence was a buttress, reinforcing his stance. They were a unit, a silent partnership forged in hardship. The movement startled Wren, who had been watching from the threshold. Silas's loud, aggressive voice was a monster from her past, and she let out a small, terrified whimper. She scrambled from the doorway and hid behind Liam's legs, her small hands clutching the rough fabric of his trousers, the wooden bird pressed to her chest. Her fear was a current that flowed through them, solidifying their purpose. Silas scoffed at their silent tableau. Deaf, mute, and half-starved. A pathetic little family, he spat on the ground near the gate. You have 1 week. 1 week to pay, or I will bring men to tear this wall down stone by stone and throw you out into the wilderness where you belong. He mounted his horse and rode away, leaving a cloud of dust and a poison of fear in his wake. After he was gone, Liam did not move for a long time. Then, with a deep, shuddering breath, he turned, knelt, and gently pried Wren's hands from his leg. He looked not at the child, but at Ilara, his eyes asking a question she could not hear but understood perfectly. She simply nodded. They would not run. Liam picked up his chisel and hammer, and the clear, ringing sound of steel on stone once more filled the air. It was the sound of defiance. The week that followed was thick with a tension that was almost visible, a shimmer in the summer air. Liam worked with a feverish intensity, not building anything new, but reinforcing what he had already made, checking every stone in the wall as if it were a soldier in his command. Ilara harvested what she could from the garden, her movements economical and graceful, storing food as if preparing for a long siege. They did not speak of Silas's threat, but it was a constant, unspoken presence between them. The village, however, was speaking of it a great deal. The story of Silas's visit spread like wildfire. But this time, the whispers were different. The villagers had been witnesses. They had seen the transformation of the cottage with their own eyes. They had watched the gaunt man work from dawn until dusk, turning rubble into a fortress. They had seen the deaf woman coax life from barren soil. They saw how the haunted little girl, once a ghost, now played in the sunlit yard, safe within the stone walls. Their judgment, once so swift and harsh, began to curdle into something else, sympathy, and a slow-burning anger directed at Silas, a man many of them already disliked for his arrogance and greed. One morning, Ilara found a small sack of flour sitting just outside their gate. The next day, a pail of fresh milk from a farmer's wife who averted her eyes and hurried away when Ilara saw her. A basket of late summer apples appeared, then a bundle of firewood. They were small, anonymous acts of solidarity. The community, which had once cast them out, was now slowly, cautiously, drawing a protective circle around them. The wall Liam had built was no longer just his own, it had become a symbol for the entire village of dignity earned through hard labor. An attack on it would be an attack on a value they all understood. The tide of opinion had turned, and Silas, in his cruelty, had unwittingly made heroes of his victims. The stage was set for a confrontation that would involve more than just 3 broken people and a bully. The day the week was up, the sky itself seemed to hold its breath. The morning was unnaturally still and humid, the air heavy and oppressive. By midday, the horizon had turned a bruised, greenish-black, and a low, distant rumble echoed from the hills. A storm was coming, a physical manifestation of the conflict that was about to break upon them. Elara secured the shutters and brought Ren inside, the child's eyes wide with a fear that understood the tension in the air even if she did not understand its cause. Liam stood just inside the gate of his wall, watching the road. He was not holding his hammer now. His hands were empty, hanging at his sides. He was calm, his thin body poised with the stillness of a predator waiting. He would not throw the first stone. The first fat drops of rain began to fall just as Silas and 2 hired brutes appeared over the rise. They were large, sullen-faced men who carried heavy iron bars, tools of destruction. The rain quickly intensified, plastering Silas's fine clothes to his skin and turning the dusty road to mud. He didn't seem to care. His face was a mask of grim determination, his eyes burning with a triumphant fire. "The week is up," he shouted over the rising wind, his voice thin and sharp against the deep growl of thunder. "I've come for my rent, or my land." Liam did not move. He simply stood his ground, the rain washing over him, his shirt clinging to his bony frame. He looked impossibly fragile, yet utterly immovable. Elara watched from the window, her hand on Ren's small, trembling shoulder. She felt a tremor of fear, but it was overshadowed by a fierce, protective pride. This man, this scarecrow, was the bravest man she had ever known. Silas gestured to his men. "Tear it down," he commanded, pointing a finger at the beautiful stone wall. "Start with the gate." As Silas's men hefted their iron bars and took a step toward the gate, another sound joined the chorus of the storm. It was not thunder. It was the sound of heavy, determined footsteps, the squelch of many boots in the mud. From the direction of the village, a group of men emerged from the downpour. They were farmers and craftsmen, led by the grizzled village elder, a man whose authority was etched into the lines on his face. They carried not weapons of malice, but the tools of their trades, pitchforks, axes, heavy wooden mallets. They did not run or shout. They simply walked, their purpose clear, and formed a silent, solid line alongside Liam, facing Silas and his hired thugs. The 2 brutes hesitated, their confidence faltering as they found themselves suddenly, drastically, outnumbered. The elder stepped forward, his white hair plastered to his head by the rain. He planted the end of his walking stick firmly in the mud and fixed Silas with a gaze as hard as quarry stone. "This is not your land to take, Silas," his voice boomed, easily carrying over the wind. "This was worthless scrub, a blemish on the village, and you know it. We all know it." He gestured with a gnarled hand toward the cottage, toward the wall. "This man," he said, pointing at Liam, "has paid for this land. He has paid with the sweat of his brow and the skill of his hands. He has built something from nothing. He has earned it." Another farmer spoke up, his voice thick with anger. "And this woman has made it a home. They have bothered no one and have improved what you left to rot." The community, once a chorus of scorn, had become a jury, and their verdict was unanimous. Silas stood stunned, his face a mixture of fury and disbelief. He had expected to crush 3 lonely outcasts, not to face the unified will of the entire village. Publicly shamed, his cruelty laid bare for all to see, he was defeated. With a final, venomous glare, he motioned for his men to lower their bars. Without another word, they turned and trudged back down the muddy road, their retreat a pathetic, undignified spectacle. As they disappeared over the hill, the heavens opened completely, a torrential, cleansing downpour that washed the tension from the air, leaving only the sound of rain on stone. The storm passed as quickly as it had arrived. The sun broke through the clouds, casting a brilliant, clarifying light over the drenched landscape. Droplets of water sparkled on every leaf of Elara's garden and ran in rivulets down the face of Liam's wall. The villagers did not disperse immediately. Instead, they helped Liam check for any damage, righting a small section of fence the wind had toppled and securing a loose roof shingle. It was an act of quiet welcome, an official acceptance of this small family into the community's heart. When the work was done, they left as they had come, with simple nods of respect and solidarity. Ilara, Liam, and Ren stood alone in their yard, the air washed clean and fresh. The world felt new. Ren, who had watched the entire confrontation from the safety of the cottage, slowly walked out onto the damp earth. She looked up at Liam, her expression one of awe and dawning comprehension. She finally understood that this thin, quiet man was not fragile, he was her fortress. For the very first time, she reached out and slipped her small, trusting hand into his large, calloused one. The simple touch was monumental, a silent promise fulfilled. Liam looked down at his daughter's hand in his, then he looked up at Ilara. His face, so long a mask of sorrow and restraint, broke open. A smile, a real one, crinkled the corners of his haunted eyes and filled them with a light that rivaled the morning sun. He drew a deep breath, and his voice, rusty from disuse but clear and steady, filled the small space between them. "Home," he said. The single word was a foundation stone, a roof, and a hearth all at once. He was not just looking at the cottage, he was looking at Ren, and he was looking at Ilara. Though she could not hear the sound, she saw the word form on his lips. She read it in the geography of his face, felt it in the warmth that radiated from his eyes, and understood it with every fiber of her being. A matching smile bloomed on her own face, and in the quiet, sun-drenched yard, their broken pieces finally, truly, became whole. What you just witnessed wasn't a story about a wall of stone, but about the walls we build in our hearts. It's a reminder that true strength isn't measured by physical size or a loud voice, but by quiet resilience, gentle creation, and the courage to protect what you love. We all encounter people who are judged unfairly, who are seen as too thin, too quiet, or simply too different. This story asks you to look closer, to see the king in the scarecrow, the strength in the silence, and the home in the ruin. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of the power of kindness and dignity, please show your support by giving it a thumbs up. Subscribe to our channel for more inspirational stories that celebrate the quiet heroes among us. And please, share your thoughts in the comments below. When has someone's quiet strength surprised you? Your story matters.